So, to Israeli perspectives, we have to put a background for the whole conflict. Year 2017 is marking the centenary of Balfour Declaration. It will be 100 years since the infamous void and null British government document was issued promising the world jury where they were told that their homeland, what later became Israel, many European governments, figures, and even civil society saw it as a chance to get rid of Jewish communities which lived in Europe for centuries. The European societies have always had anti-Semitic trends toward Jewish people across the continent. One could claim that establishing Israel was an anti-Semitic approach adopted by Europe. Balfour Declaration was then used as a tool to stream in influxes of illegal Jewish immigration into Palestine. Zionist and European media was promoting this massive migration and described these Jewish migrants as poor and vulnerable. As Jewish migration into Palestine peaked by 1940, of Palestine. More than 530 villages were destroyed by Jewish paramilitary gangs, Argon, the Lehi, the Haganah, and the Balmach, whilst hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were killed, wounded, and forcibly displaced. Ironically, those violent terrorist groups have formed what's known for us today as the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. Apparently, the bloody trend in the behavior of Jewish terrorism in 1948 was passed to the IDF. This is clear as of what we saw in Gaza by killing innocent children in 2008, 2012, 2014. It's rather a joke that we hear Israeli government attempts to fool us that they are the only and sole democracy in the region. The only word I can use to describe Israel is a rogue state. History will always be a witness to our modern day brutal establishment of Israel. It's a small of history when it became a witness to the bloody establishment of the US on the ruins of the Red Indians. For Israel to call its establishment as an independence as a bizarre and misleading. History is clear that the rogue state of Israel was established through blood, massacres, and displacement. This is a fact that Israeli state and propaganda are trying to improve via their well-orchestrated machine of lies and misinformation. The displacement of a nation to establish country for a certain people is unethical. The replacement of Jewish population in Palestine on the account of Palestinians is a grim and immoral. Nakba means catastrophe, means agony and discrimination. The killing and displacement of Palestinians in 1948 still haunt Israel for now. Palestinians are still adamant to return and claim their homeland. To the unfortunate luck of Israel, international law gives Palestinians this right. The question remains clear. Will the state of Israel abide by international law? Will it obey international community? The answer is clear, no. Israel is based on illegal and will remain illegal. It's when Israel atones for its mistake, peace will be feasible. A roadmap to peace means the return of Palestinian refugees, millions of them, means a self-determination of Palestinians. Meanwhile, the Palestinian diaspora is no better than the occupied territory, but even worse at some camps. In Lebanon, for example, they are deprived of all rights with exception to few. No right to work, house building, education, and other rights. So is that a decent life for a human? I of course not so. The alternative for them is to return to Palestine. Syria is no better place for them, where they are affected by civil war. And if you go in deep details or some details about the situation and current situation for the Palestinian refugees in the 5 different areas where they found themselves after they were evacuated by force from their homeland. Gaza Strip is a big prison. The Gaza Strip is home to a population of over 2 million people, of which over 1 million are Palestinian refugees, according to the UNRWA statistics. It's estimated that over 500,000 Palestinian refugees in Gaza live in the 8 recognized Palestinian refugee camps. The blockade of Gaza by Israel, and of course indirectly by Egypt, fully implemented since 2007, has been described by the United Nations Secretary General as a continuing collective penalty against the population in Gaza. This year entered the 11th year since the start of Israeli military blockade of Gaza Strip, continuing the collective punishment of the entire population of Gaza. The blockade has had a devastating impact on Palestinian refugees, including those living in refugee camps. The unemployment rate remains among the highest worldwide, 44%. In the year 2000, there were 10,000 refugees requiring food assistance. This number has increased 10 times, as it's now almost 1 million refugees out of 2 million of the inhabitants of Gaza require humanitarian assistance on a daily basis. A major study by the United Nations questioned whether under this situation, current condition, Gaza would even be a sustainable place to live in 2020. In West Bank, the population is around 3 million. Around 800,000 of them are refugees. Around 250,000 of those 800,000 still living in 19 camps, official camps, which is recognized by international agency UNRWA. The unemployment rate is almost 20% of those without any work. The situation in the West Bank is increasingly precocious. Palestinian refugees continue to experience difficult socio-economic conditions rooted in occupation-related policy and practices imposed by Israeli authorities. This includes a recent rise in number of house demolition and access and movement restrictions. In addition, Palestinians continue to experience high level of food insecurity, with those living in refugee camps particularly affected. We are still in West Bank, and we are talking about illegal settlements, including in East Jerusalem. Israeli authorities have, since 1967, facilitated the transfer of its civilians to the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, in violation of the 4th Geneva Convention. In 1967, Israel established 2 settlements in the West Bank, Kvaratzion and East Talboy. By 2017, Israel has established 237 settlements there, housing approximately 600,000 settlers. Israel applies civil law to settlers, affording them legal protection, rights and benefits that are not extended to Palestinians living in the same territory who are subjected to Israeli military law. Israel provides settlers with infrastructure, services and subsidies that it denies to Palestinians, creating and sustaining a separate and unequal system of law, rules and services. Since the annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967, Israeli authorities have promoted the twofold goal of expanding the city's Jewish population and reducing its Palestinian population. Various steps have been adopted to achieve this objective, including the isolation of East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank. Land appropriation and discriminatory policies on the planning and construction and budget reduction of this. The situation outside the historic Palestine in the neighboring countries where the refugees are in three main countries, Jordan, Syria and Lebanon, and the worst case of those three sectors of the Palestinian refugees, of course, are the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, which you are talking about 80,000 of the Palestinians who were evacuated from Palestine in 1948 were driven to Lebanon. Official estimation of them, according to the UNRWA record, around 450,000 Palestinians are registered as Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and they are denied to over 71 different sectors of work according to the Lebanese law, which is actually violation to their basic human rights, where the same law gives a wide room to any investors to Lebanon to entertain being maybe a second citizen in Lebanon. Of course, UNRWA has played a major role in the daily life of the Palestinian refugees since 1949, when the year when the UNRWA was established, and it is a strategic approach for the Palestinian refugees for UNRWA to stay inactive and stay on board for the situation of Palestinian refugees. And the Palestinians believe that one of the Israeli major plans is to stop UNRWA for working in the field of refugees, because Israel has realized how important is the UNRWA for the Palestinian refugees, the record for the refugees, the humanitarian assistance and support for the daily life for the UNRWA, and that's why we have noticed recent a severe and aggressive attack from the Israeli government and its supporters against UNRWA for it to stop working in the Palestinian refugees. So one of the approaches for us in the future as pro-Palestine campaigners, as Palestinians, UNRWA lies in the central part of our thinking that it should still be there until the last refugees will be accommodated to go back to his homeland in Palestine. If I want to sum up the future for the situation in the Middle East, the statistic shows that after 70 years of the Nakba, the population of the Palestinians, to the vast majority, more than 85% of them are still living in historic Palestine and in the neighboring countries. This means that the demography of the Palestinians have made life for the Israelis very difficult for them to get away of their crime. That means, obviously, practically, without tackling the refugee problem, it will be no solution, long-term solution to the situation in the Middle East. And it's an abuse to the human rights, basic human rights for the human being as Palestinians, not to tackle this basic right. And just imagine that now in historic Palestine, the Palestinians are almost the same figure as the Jewish quote-unquote population inside in the historic Palestine. And as a political analysis for the situation, quote-unquote, of a Jewish state, it has been raised recently because of the demography of the situation in historic Palestine. So it will not help the situation by all means, theoretical-wise, practical-wise, legal-wise, in any sense you want to put it, not to tackle in a very serious situation the issue of the refugees, and the easiest way of it to be tackled is just to implement the United Nations resolution related to the situation, and it's still valid, which is 194, which was issued in 1949 and is still valid, and it has been voted yes repeatedly more than 135 times till now. And the right of return is a basic right for the human being, and without this, I think we will go nowhere, and the situation will be very heated until such an issue be tackled. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You've given us a background on the situation of Palestinian refugees. You've warned about the situation, which didn't change since 70 years, and you showed us how important it is that now is the time, it's far past time to tackle the situation. And those who have been to Palestine and have seen the refugee camps, as I've done also in the West Bank, you see the suffering and the loss of perspective and the loss of hope those people have, and it's far past time. You also mentioned the importance of the work of the Palestinian, the United Nations Refugee Agency for Palestinians, and we all know that they have been attacked also recently by even Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who publicly called to shut it down, which is a travesty in view of the situation that hasn't been solved since 70 years. So he prefers to shut down an agency instead of tackling the problem. As the next speaker, I would like to introduce Mr. Rami Abdush, who is chairman of the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Monitor. Thank you very much for being here with us. He will talk about the international community's responsibility to implement the right to self-determination and why it is so important to finally end the Israeli occupation. Thanks a lot for being here with us.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you for all for your presence and participation. I think after 27 years of negotiation between Palestinians and Israelis, the questions that arose every time, until when we will have this kind of negotiation without leading to any real solution for this current occupation for Palestinian land. There is no genuine intention from Israeli side to end its occupation, and it's time for the international community, for third parties to take their roles. We hear that every time when we experience any failure for any negotiation between Palestinian and Israeli side. And the question is, what is the responsibility of the third states to end the Israeli occupation of Palestine? Remember in 2014, maybe I think December 2014, a request was submitted by Palestinian Authority to Security Council to adopt a plan to end the occupation within 2 years. But of course, this request by Palestinian Authority failed. Later on, as you may know, Palestine recognized as a state in the UN, of course non-member state, and hence we can say that the ongoing occupation could be considered as permanent aggression, which is reflected by the use of armed force by a state against another state. Of course, Israel now a state that uses armed force against another state, which is Palestine. That means that there is a real or a genuine claim that Palestinian has the the right of self-defense. What is the responsibility of the United Nations and third states countries? First, they have the responsibility to implement the principles of self-determination and at the same time to maintain the international peace and security. Let us have a look to self-determination. For Palestinians, self-determination right was recognized by United Nations, all United Nations organizations, and even by International Court of Justice. Article 1, 2, 55 and 56 of the United Nations Charter, UN members pledge themselves to support the principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. The ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, provides that the state parties to the present covenant shall promote the realization of the right of self-determination and shall respect that right. What is the meaning of respect? What respect means? The Human Rights Committee stated that respect, it imposes specific obligations on states parties not only in relation to their own people, but vis-a-vis all people which have not been able to exercise or have been deprived of the possibility of their right to self-determination. Let us go to General Assembly of the United Nations Resolution number 2625. It stated clearly that every state has the duty to render assistance to the United Nations in carrying out the responsibilities entrusted to it by the Charter regarding the implementation of that principle. Such peoples are entitled to seek and to receive support in accordance with the purpose and the principles of the Charter. If we look at the International Court of Justice advisory opinion about Wall case in 2004, item number 155 stated that the court would observe that the obligations violated by Israel include certain obligations erga omnes. It concerns all parties. Such obligations are by their very nature the concerns of all states. So any obligation should be the concerns of all states, not one state and not even the United Nations bodies. The obligation erga omnes violated by Israel are the obligation to respect the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. If we look to the occupation, according to International Court of Justice, the question normally arose whether the occupation a breach or a threat to the international peace and security. International Court of Justice emphasized that the urgent necessity for the United Nations as a whole to redouble its efforts to bring the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which continue to pose a threat to international peace and security. United Nations General Assembly stated the repeated violation by Israel and its failure to comply with relevant Security Council and General Assembly resolutions constitute a threat to international peace and security. So, when we talk about Israeli occupation for Palestine, we are talking about a real threat to the international peace and security. Let us look backward and see the practices of United Nations in similar cases related to occupation. We have two cases, Namibia and Kuwait. In Namibia, the acts by the United Nations and International Court of Justice stated clearly that the South African intervention in Namibia is illegal occupation. What International Court of Justice said States members of the United Nations are under obligation to recognize the illegality of South Africa's presence in Namibia and the invalidity of its acts on behalf of or concerning Namibia, and to refrain from any acts and in particular any dealings with the governments of South Africa implying recognition of the legality of or lending support or assistance to such presence and administration, which means that comprehensive boycott for South Africa. In case of Africa, the General Assembly condemned the illegal occupation of Namibia, called upon all states, in view of the threat to international peace and security posed by South Africa, to impose against that country comprehensive mandatory sanctions in accordance with the provisions of the Charters, and urged all states to cease dealing with South Africa in order to totally isolate it. So the solution was to totally isolate South Africa. Let us go now for Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. The United Nations Security Council took several decisions in order to force Iraq to terminate its occupation, determined the invasion as a breach of international peace and security, imposed economic sanctions, allowed Iraq one final opportunity until 15th of January 1991. If not, the Security Council stated, the Security Council would use all necessary means to ensure the Iraqi occupation comes to an end. These examples actually show that what happened in Namibia and Iraq should be implemented in the same way on the Israeli occupation for Palestinian land. I think there's two important points I need to conclude. The turning of self-determination struggles into armed conflicts, normally Eritrea, Albanians of Kosovo and Abkhazia. The second point, those cases received serious attention only when they turned non-violent. The international community responsibility is to interfere urgently, without any delay, to end this occupation, because leaving this for negotiation means that Israel has the right to occupy other people's land and to occupy their life, and at the same time to continue its threat for international community and international stability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your appealing presentation. You have shown all of us the number of UN resolutions, the number of bodies who have issued statements and decisions on behalf of the Palestinians, underlining the importance of the right to self-determination of the Palestinian people. And you've shown us as well that very apparently in this world these resolutions have not been taken as serious as it should be. There is a huge number of resolutions and none of them has been implemented when it comes to in view of other conflicts, has been acting much quicker and much swifter. So there is a lack of determination to really end this conflict, and I was, of course, sad to hear your statement that apparently in the past the UN did only intervene in cases where conflicts turned violent, and this is what we should avoid at any cost. So it is far past time to end the occupation. And now I would like our third speaker has just arrived. It's a pleasure to see you. Please come to the panel. I'll shortly introduce him. His name is Ali Al-Sher, and he will talk about the impact of Israeli human rights violations on the health of Palestinians. So thank you very much for being here with us, and you have the floor.
Thank you, and excuse me for going a lot of time in the building. This is the first time, and what I can talk actually as a person who come directly from the West Bank. I work for UNFPA, and I cover the health program for West Bank and Gaza, and it will be my talk about things that are felt on the ground. And the study that we have brought with us, we brought one copy that we can share with you, is talking about the issue of the 2014 military operation in Gaza, and in my duty as the person responsible for women's health, sexual and reproductive health, we have been faced by the what we call the victims in the shadow, and the impact of this crisis on women and children during the 51 days attack that has resulted in women, 16 women, pregnant women being killed, 5 women dying and as maternal mortality because of not being able to reach safely to healthcare. Number of health facilities and health centers damaged during the attack, 17 health personnel killed during the attack. Not only this, but also 28% of the population of Gaza being displaced to shelters, with the United Nations and all the agencies being prepared at the latest to receive around 50,000 displaced people during the attack. The huge number of displaced has resulted in many, first in disruption of women's health services. With this we have antenatal care, family planning, but also access to emergency obstetric care, because of the women departments in hospital have been taking care of the direct casualties of the attack and replanned to become surgery departments. That whole disruption of care, that whole stress that occurred on the health system resulted in increased fatality for newborns, major increase in premature deliveries, and that has in fact continued for 1 year after the attack has stopped. So the data in 2015 that we collected 1 year after the military operation ended did not show any signs of recovery of health services and healthcare in the country. Now, if we look at the issue of the West Bank, we find that access is a major problem, with the tertiary care being provided in Jerusalem hospitals, and any access to Jerusalem hospitals is subject to approval of an entry permit to Jerusalem, granted or not granted by the Israeli authorities. The recent figures about the approvals have shown that it's only 52% of the requests for permissions to enter Israel or to enter Jerusalem for treatment has been granted to patients and companions, and that approval for patients or accompanying persons is, of course, a subject of security vetting being done by the Israeli authorities. One particular issue that we are dealing with in relation to access and in relation to the right to access to healthcare is the tragic issue of breast cancer, where the 5 years survival of women living with the cancer in Gaza is only 30 to 40%, compared compared with 90 to 93% in the neighboring Israeli community, and vastly that survival issue in Gaza is an issue of access, is an issue of availability of medications, availability of services in Gaza still, in addition to the other issues that are related to social stigma and social constraints related to the breast cancer in the context of Gaza. Sorry for the short notice that we have